I'm Fred Holt, as Eve mentioned. I'm an architect and partner at 3XN, and I've been coming back and forth to Sydney, I think, for the last 3 years. I don't quite have 93 flights over here, but it's getting close. What I'm going to talk about, actually, is Quay Quarter Tower. I'm going to talk about the future of work, the shape of revolutionary thinking. What is that? Hopefully, by the end of this presentation, you'll see that Quay Quarter Tower actually facilitates this idea of the future of work and the workspace of the future. But before I go into that, I just want to talk about our approach and how we took our approach at 3XN into the design of the tower. At 3XN, we feel that architecture shapes behavior and that constraints inform the architecture. Those sound like obvious statements, but when you start your design process with that in mind, it changes the way you think about design. You start thinking about the user experience first, and the form is just something to actually help facilitate that experience. So you start thinking about a stair not just as a vertical connector linking one level to the next, but you start thinking of it as a community catalyst, a social activity, a place where people can begin to socialize. So it becomes a catalyst for social interaction. In order to help us along with some of this thinking about the user experience at the office, we have a behavioral psychologist focusing on architectural space in our office. And she likes to call these things, these strategies that we come up with, social affordances, which are just properties of space that encourage social interaction. She talks about space, people, and culture to create social synergy. We could also talk about it in terms of site, flow, and program to create that same thing. And in the research that she's done on a lot of these spaces and buildings that we've actually created, and she'll also do this with Quay Quarter Tower, she started to investigate and research those items or those strategies that actually create this social synergy, this idea of collaboration and connection. And we found that there's about 9 social affordances or strategies that we typically use when we're designing buildings, and it's creating open space, spaces to share, spaces that vary, which is actually important for choice, creating a comfortable working environment, creating places like the stair, for example, that actually invite this interaction, materials and space that stimulate, that overlap, that connect to the outdoors, and then most importantly, actually, adapt over time. And we think the reason why I'm telling you all this is we think we have all of that with Quay Quarter Tower. So what are we doing? Quite simply, we're doing a 100,000 square meter tower and podium, but what we're really doing is humanizing the high-rise. So what does that mean, actually? That means that we're taking the idea, everything that I was describing in terms of the connection, interaction, open space, all of those things that we actually feel make the working environment pleasurable, is found in this idea of these horizontal campus-style headquarters. So we're actually just taking all of those ideas, that proximity to green space, ample amounts of daylight, that connection, that interaction you have with your colleagues, and we're stacking it into a vertical village. And in the brief that we were given by AMPC, which was a great brief, they did their own research on the future of work, and they actually found that even though we can work more remotely with working through your iPad, working at home, that actually what people want, they want to interact. The more you collaborate with people, it shows that productivity actually increases. So through their brief, we started talking about these 5 C's, the community, connection, choice. Choice is extremely important and different than flexibility. Collaboration, and then, of course, creativity. And as architects, we really love the last one. But in order to get to all those, you have to actually account for interaction, for that user experience. I think too many decisions in architecture, it doesn't take into account that human experience, that human interaction, how we actually always socialize. And we think that all of those items are actually found in Quay Quarter Tower and the workspace itself. Towers actually aren't generic architectural products that can be placed anywhere. They're actually quite contextual. And we think that Quay Quarter Tower, from the very first moment you approach Yonge Street, the tower is actually addressing that activity and dynamism at the ground level. And then as you move up the tower, it takes advantage of all of those views towards the greater harbor. And then, of course, as we said, what we're doing is creating a stacked campus, a horizontal campus, and we're stacking it vertically, which means you need gardens, you need access to daylight, access to green space, and Quay Quarter Tower is actually doing that. We call the tower the vertical village. We've heard that term a bit today, but what that actually starts to connote is this idea of connection, this idea of interaction, this social dynamism that one tends to find in lower lying headquarters. Of course, the tower itself and the vertical village takes advantage of the great views out to the harbor, but in order to get that, we have an existing building. So what we're doing from a sustainable point of view is actually just chopping off a third of the existing building. We're then grafting on additional floor plate, taking advantage actually of all of the views and daylight to the north, and then slicing an atrium space within that. And that not only increases the amount of daylight that gets deeper into the floor plate, but it also increases the number of users and workers that actually have access to great views and daylight. And that actually creates these vertical villages. A typical village is around 3 levels, where you have a very socially dynamic space at the heart of the atrium. And then as you move around the floor plate, you have the possibility to fit out your space actually with a variety of work settings. And within the northern area of the building, you get this social spine. So those atria are actually creating a social spine that connects people. As Kim said in the keynote address, you don't just walk out of a lobby and then confronted with a blank wall. You actually see the views. Most high-rises have a horizontal aspect. This is a vertical aspect, so it's increasing that sense of place, which is also important when you're dealing with workspace of the future. And then those connected spaces, as you saw in Kim's presentation, actually allow this, again, this social dynamism, this understanding that you're connected to a bigger workforce. No longer are you just stacked one slab after the next with no connection to your colleagues, but you actually not only see the great views, but you also see what your colleagues are doing. And that serendipity in the world, it becomes less and less a part of our daily existence, but these types of buildings actually allow for that serendipity, that moment of informal connection and knowledge sharing, which I think is key to the workspace of the future. So if we just look at the floor plate, the blue outline represents the doubling of the square meters. But this image, actually, it's quite incredible. We're in the heart of the CBD, between the Circular Quay and CBD area. And we have floor plates that are 2,000 square meters net. And that, we basically have one arm that's 75 meters, and then the southern end 40, and then we go up to 50 on the other side. And that actually then rotates and shifts as the building, as the blocks actually stack vertically. And what that allows, actually, flexibility is great, but it actually allows floor plates that actually have a variety of work settings. Flexibility is something that actually takes time to adapt. Variety actually is there when you need it. So if you're on a typical floor plate, you have great views to the atrium, you can have great views or social settings out towards the botanical garden. And this is because we have really large floor plates that actually allow for a variety of space to occur on the plate. Analytics are great, determining where people need to sit, but you have to provide that variety of work setting in order to have this new workspace of the future. And I think now if you want to check your phones, you could probably do that, because I probably have about 10 or 100 different variety of floor plates actually to go through with Quay Quarter Tower. But just shows that large contiguous floor plates surrounded by a central core actually allow for these hot desking, or it allows for these large conference areas. We have third spaces down at the lower levels that actually have larger conference facilities, project war rooms. So the building actually, because of those large plates, can provide actually a variety of opportunities. I told you I had a few to click through. But this is when I get into the Steve Jobs approach, where you think that the presentation's over, and I say just one more thing. We've built in to the actual floor plate flexibility, so that over time, if that corporation, if your office wants to grow and they don't want to lose that synergy they're actually gaining from the atria, from the vertical village, you can actually demount the atrium floor base post-occupancy. And the way we've done that is actually to include slightly different construction in the atrium floor. So post-occupancy, this can be demountable or demounted and then taken down the goods lift quite quickly. So that means you can go from three-level atria to a 6 and a 3 or a 3 and a 6, or you can begin to open it up to one large atria. And I think that's pretty phenomenal, actually, that over time a high-rise can adapt. So it's not only encouraging this interaction amongst your colleagues, but it's actually a building that can adapt with you over time. So you can go from a 3-level atria to a 5-level atria. Unfortunately, we didn't get the hanging gardens in the scheme, but we'll keep trying, right, Eve? But at the base of the atria, you have this connection to the outdoors. You have the possibility to have a garden space, which I think is actually it's not that common within high-rise construction or high-rise towers. Occasionally, you might have one crown garden at the top, but at the base of each one of these blocks, you're connected to outdoor green space. So you can be inside, feel like you're connected to the outdoors, and then also actually utilize that space. But we don't stop just between each blocks. At the crown, we've actually positioned all the mechanical equipment towards the southern end of the building to actually take advantage of the crown. So you have a 3-level terrace, outdoor terrace overlooking the botanical gardens. You also have great views to the harbor. So this is probably going to be the hottest ticket in town for New Year's Eve, I could imagine. But I always like to say the tower is actually quite simple. It really is just 5 campus-style headquarters stacked atop each other. It's simple building with a little bit of cantilevering to the north. So it's I always like to think it's actually quite a simple building. But the facade, everyone's probably wondering why I have a facade presentation within Workspace of the Future. We call the facade the performative pattern. It's actually doing 2 things for us. It's breaking the overall scale of the building. So there's a zigzag with the pattern that perceptually breaks the scale within the urban cityscape. That's great. That's architectural lingo. We like that. But more importantly, actually, it's reducing the solar radiance by 30%. It's a high-quality, high-performing DGU system with an external sun shading hood. Reduces the solar radiance, as I said, by 30%. So why is this a big deal? That way, the views that you actually have towards the north will always be there. This building doesn't need blinds for thermal use. So the view that you're going to see is the view in this image is the view that you'll always have. You don't need blinds coming up and down a couple times a day, listening to the motor. So this is actually what the facade's doing. It's performing. It's just not there to actually give texture to the building. So if we call the tower the vertical village, we call the Podium actually the horizontal village. I guess most villages are horizontal. But as Kim said, there's a public park at the top of the Podium. And the reason why these sorts of experiences are important is coming into the city actually to work, it's no longer just about doing your work and leaving. It's about socializing. It's about connecting with place. And we think that Quay Quarter Tower is actually doing all those things. So from the moment you arrive as a user of the building, of course you're going to have that great connection with your colleagues in the atria. But that experience starts at ground level. You're actually connecting to place, connecting to city. Because of the 11-meter height difference over the site, we actually can connect to multiple levels of the Podium. So your experience can vary depending on your arrival point of view. So what do we think the future of work, the shape of revolutionary thinking is? We actually think that it's Quay Quarter Tower. It's connecting with place, it's connecting with people, it's providing choice of a working environment. So this just is a video I think some of you saw that actually sums up what Quay Quarter Tower is. It starts at the base, it addresses those contextual issues around the city. It addresses the worker, the user's experience. It connects you with your colleagues. It allows for these informal social interactions where knowledge sharing can actually be an active part of your daily experience. There's one other thing I think is important, and Chris and Tom will touch on it, and Graham Yan will touch on it a little bit later during one of his sessions. there's a lot of sustainable aspects of this building, but I think one of the things that we're most proud of is the fact that it's an urban sustainable project. It's actually relifing or revitalizing a part of the city that actually, as you saw from Kim's presentation, is lacking some of that. So sustainability can be not only from an energy point of view or from a social point of view, but it's actually a revitalizing place, and we're actually quite proud of that. So that's probably another one of those Steve Jobs moments, one more thing. So I think with that, I'll pass it on to Chris and Robert to talk about AMPC's sustainable aspirations, and then more specifically about Quay Quarter Tower's sustainability approach.